And if I click and see the console, you will see that I'm in the loading state and my object is basically an empty object. This is my context. Let's do a little bit more. I'm gonna create a button that will send done event. So if you remember, if we are in the loading state and we are triggering done, we're supposed to be in ideal. So after clicking on done, I should see, instead of loading, I should see ideal, as you can see. But that's just the beginning. If, for example, I do refresh here, and I click here on done, it will go back to loading. Let me refresh. Right now we are in loading, but if I click done, I'll still stay in loading. So I want to change the button accordingly to the state. Let's do this. Okay, let's hope it's gonna be okay. So now I'm in loading. Let's click done. I'm in ideal and my button changed to refresh. Clicking on refresh will set it to loading, and I go back and forth between those two states. Great. Now this is obviously not a real UI. We want to fetch a real data. Let me create something fake here. So I will have fetch function, but that function won't really necessarily will send a request to the backend, but I can play and simulate like I'm sending a request. I'll use promises here and set timeout. Okay, let's try and test it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this fetch inside use effect. Now, let's see if it's gonna work. Oh, yeah. Let's try just use effect and import it from React. Oh. Let me refresh. Okay. Looks good. But I don't get... Oh, I get the data. Let me change it to 2 seconds. Good. So we want to do the following thing. If it's successful, I want to change to the ideal state. So I'm going to use send type done. And if it's failing, sorry, I'll call send with type this one. Let's see. And it's working. And I can click refresh again. And it go back. Now let's use the count here to switch between failing and succeeding. Save it, and it's ideal. Let's click refresh. It's still ideal. Again, which is weird. Let me refresh. Clicking again, failure, and we have the retry. Loading, ideal. So this is just a basic example. We're later gonna jump into a very or more interesting example, something that most of us are using in our daily basis. Okay, so before we just started using the fetch and to switch between or among the 3 states that we have. Now, this is the UI. I'm using Ant Design as I mentioned before. So here I'm refreshing and I'm in the ideal state. If I refresh, it's still okay. And if I'll refresh again, it will fail. And clicking again on retry, I'm supposed to have refresh. That's good. The problem is I didn't show you how we can use the context in order to get data from each send request or send action here. We basically can pass a payload and save it in the context, which later we can pass arguments or parameters from the context to our components or to our context. So let's see how we can do it. First of all, we need to create here a context attribute, because I can think of two values that matter to me. One of them is data. Can put it as null for now, and the other one is error. Also, I'll set it as null by default. Great. Now, when I'm calling send, I can pass a payload. So let's go to here, and we'll set here the payload to be res.data. And when you get to this place, the payload is going to be this value that is passed to the catch function. Obviously, it doesn't have to be payload. You can set anything else. It could be this attribute. But because it makes it much easier to read the code when we have this payload, or have one single attribute that we can get the data that we got from that action, I would rather do that. So now that we have this, we need somehow to assign the value to the context or update the context. In XState, we have a function called assign. The assign function can take the context and the event and merge them together. I'll show you how. So when I'm getting into the ideal, I want to run a function. That function will get context and the event. Or actually, I can put this like this. I can say that the data will be event.payload and error will be null in case, oh yeah, forgot to say this. So I'm getting context, but I'm not using it, and I'm getting an event. And yeah, later we'll see if it's working. And in a very similar way, I'm doing the same thing here. However, here the data, I'll probably won't change the data, but I'll set the error to what I have in the event payload. So in case you change it, for example, we're passing an error here instead of payload, we will have to go here and set it to error, because that's what we are passing. And sometimes it's really confusing, and that's why I like to use payload in both of them, or anything, any attribute name that you will decide, but it's as long as it's consistent. Okay, I'm saving this. Now let me open the console, and I'm gonna refresh. It's refreshing, and at the beginning the data was null, error was null, and when it was ideal I got the data, and I get the error, which is null. I'm doing a refresh again. It's ideal. Let me refresh again. Failure. Last time what we did, we managed to pass payload or set our context accordingly. So when we are in the ideal state, the context will look like this. When we are in the failure state, our context will look like that. And when we are loading, obviously we don't care what's going to be in our context because we're just showing a spinner. Now that we have that, we can pass what we have in the context to our state. So here, for example, I can render the error. And as you can see, it's an object, so I probably should have message, if I'm not wrong. Let's see. Well, let me. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I have an error. Save this. Hopefully now it will work. Great. Now let's remove this empty state and instead have a table. So I'm importing table from Ant Design. I'm gonna put this here. I'm gonna tell what the columns are gonna be. In this case, I will have only one column. And the data source. For now, I'll just have nothing. I'll save it. Refresh. So, no data. But actually, the data source, I get it from the context. So let's move it here. Now, let's put data here. And here I have the user. But I will also add the refresh button. And now if I click here, I'll get the error state. Click retry. I get the table. That's pretty much it. I hope you enjoy it.